I've spent a lot of time with Persona 5 Tactica, and I'm happy to say that it has easily become one of my favorite tactical RPGs in recent memory, as it offers a strategic and engaging combat system, an all-new story featuring new and returning characters, alongside a deep, well-written narrative that surprised me with how effective it was. So, let's break it down in GameXplain's review of Persona 5 Tactica. First things first, this game expects you to have played Persona 5 as it doesn't take the time to introduce the Phantom Thieves, but it's a new story that largely focuses on new characters, so it's not like you have to play P5 in order to understand what's going on. It's a pretty straightforward narrative involving the Phantom Thieves facing yet another threat within the metaverse as they're joined by two new characters, but there's a lot more at play than you might expect. Only a few hours in, things start falling into place as major revelations unravel as you make your way through multiple kingdoms, and thanks to its incredible characters, I found myself fully engaged the entire way through. Not only does this story have some pretty grandiose moments, but it also takes its time to develop its cast through smaller interactions here and there, and I enjoyed them all the same. I really want to say more, but I'm only allowed to talk about the first main area, and for spoiler reasons, I won't mention too much about these new characters, but I will say that I found the story to be really awesome, and it kept this momentum up till the very end. It doesn't overstay its welcome either, as the main story only took me around 30 hours to finish. The entire way through, I was always eager to see what would happen next, and near the tail end of the experience, it pulled an insane plot twist that completely blew my mind and instantly made me a fan, and I think the story will stick with me for a long time. It was executed well and ended things on a very satisfying note. As I mentioned before, you'll be taking part in strategy-based combat against the enemies of the metaverse. I knew what to expect, but what I didn't see coming was how much fun it would end up being, no doubt thanks to how the game blends mechanics from Persona 5 and tactical RPGs together, resulting in flashy attacks that allow you to string together combos through the use of the one more mechanic, as well as take advantage of the battlefield's terrain. You have your basic attack for close quarters combat, you can summon your persona and use a wide variety of skills, and you have access to your gun, which is great for ranged attacks. With these options at your disposal, you have plenty of ways to plan out what you'll do. Something important to note is that movement takes priority over everything, meaning you can move around as much as you want within a designated area, and as long as you don't take an action, your turn isn't spent. This allows you to focus on positioning first and foremost, which I absolutely love because it gives the game a nice free flow feeling. So much so that I initially ran around wildly and aggressively charged toward my enemies, which I quickly found out was not a good idea. You see, scattered around the battlefield are a ton of places to duck and cover. Some completely obscure you from enemy fire, while others only partially. Partial cover reduces incoming damage, and full cover can completely nullify damage from certain angles. What I neglected to understand at first was just how important this is. You always want to hide behind cover because if you're out in the open, you're in a vulnerable state and almost guaranteed to be hit for critical damage, which allows the enemy to get another action, and depending on the enemy type you're going against, that decision to hide behind cover can mean a difference between victory and a game over screen. It's worth noting that this also applies to you as well. If you attack an enemy who isn't shielded by cover, you'll be able to capitalize and chain attacks together, which is very satisfying. The most impressive aspect of the combat is how interactive it can be. For starters, any basic attack will launch smaller enemies a short distance away, so if an enemy is protected by cover, you can do a basic attack to push them out and force them out of hiding, opening them up to critical damage. If an enemy happens to be in a path that they get launched, they'll both take damage. Same goes for your allies too. There were times that I accidentally launched an enemy directly toward a party member and I ended up taking out my own ally because they already had low health. Oops. But it doesn't end there. You can also use the battlefield to your advantage. Most stages have a lower and an upper floor with enemies populating both areas. If you fulfill the right conditions, you'll be able to launch an enemy from the top floor and have your ally on the bottom floor follow up with a second attack to deal some extra damage. My absolute favorite mechanic in this game though, is the triple threat attack. This is basically your all-out attack that is available after surrounding a downed enemy with 3 allies. Launching this attack initiates a short but awesome cutscene of the party absolutely decimating any enemy caught in its path. The combat here is just explosive and flashy and I can't help but love it. When you're not progressing the main story, you'll likely be spending your time optimizing your skills and equipment, fusing personas, doing quests, or just talking to your allies. All of this is accessible from your base of operations, the metaverse version of LeBlanc, and spending time here is essential to making sure you have the best equipment, skills, and personas. The process of fusing personas in the Velvet Room is basically identical to how it's always been. You smash two of them together for a new, more powerful persona who can inherit a skill from the previous two. The key difference here is the fact that there are no elemental weaknesses at all. Instead, skills like Agi, Zio, or Bufu, fire, electric, and ice respectively, just apply status effects to basic damage. On top of that, in addition to everyone's main canonical persona like Joker and Arsene, any basic persona you get your hands on can be equipped by any character as a sub-persona, which mainly boosts their stats and lets them use that persona's skills. This way, any character can cast any spell they want so long as you have the right persona equipped. This is a fantastic option because it opens up so many possibilities when it comes to party customization, and I really would love to see this in mainline Persona going forward. Also, a side note, I love how the Persona fusing cutscene is basically the Velvet Room attendant being a blacksmith. You'll also be spending your time doing side quests, which are little missions that pop up as you progress the story. They usually have a specific win condition, such as defeating every enemy in only a few turns, or reaching a goal in a single turn. If there was a single part of this game that taught me the mechanics the most, it was the side quests. Some were pretty easy, but others almost demanded that I play in this very specific way or I wouldn't be able to complete the mission, almost to the point where it felt like I was playing a puzzle game. Completing these missions are worthwhile though, because you can be rewarded with personas and skill points which can be allocated to your characters through a skill tree. This is your main way of strengthening your abilities as well as unlocking passive buffs that will help you in battle. It's also worth mentioning that completing every quest in a kingdom will unlock a special persona for fusion that wouldn't be available through normal means. Overall, I had a good bit of fun with the quests despite me spending hours trying to figure out how to complete them. It's a nice way to fight enemies without necessarily focusing on the story. During your downtime, you're also able to talk with your allies. It's not like social links though. This option initiates cutscenes with different people interacting with one another. Some relate to the main story and others are just side scenarios. Either way, I recommend watching these whenever they come up, not only because they help to develop the characters, but because you can also be rewarded with skill points for just watching them, and you want to get your hands on as many skill points as possible. Something else that's important is the weapon shop, where you can buy a slew of different guns. I highly recommend buying up as much powerful equipment as possible because it's a great way to deal damage in battle without using up all of your SP, and you want to conserve it because these skills can be quite expensive to use. Between Persona Fusion, the skill tree, and purchasing weapons, there are lots of ways to customize your party setup to your liking. Persona 5 Tactica looks really nice. Although I initially wasn't the biggest fan of the cheapified versions of the main characters, I did eventually warm up to the new art style. Would I have preferred the normal proportioned characters? Sure, but this turned out to not be as jarring or distracting as I expected. As a matter of fact, there are a handful of 2D animated cutscenes and there, the new art style looks incredible. I will say though, when it comes to the visual novel style cutscenes, which are the largest part of the storytelling, Joker in particular sticks out like a sore thumb. Everyone else is very expressive as they speak, and this new style shows them off well, but Joker kinda just stands around with a stone-faced expression most of the time. I think that this game would have benefited if Joker wasn't a silent protagonist this time around. Because the story focuses on new characters more than anyone else, I feel that Joker being silent doesn't really benefit the writing in any meaningful way. I played the Nintendo Switch version for this review, and while it does target 30 FPS, I didn't notice any frame drops at all. Performance seemed stable and the art style, while not graphically intense, looked really good whether I was playing docked or in handheld mode. The game is also just oozing with style, as you'd expect from Persona. I also can't review a Persona game without mentioning the music, and the soundtrack for Tactica is incredible. It's very similar to Persona 5 despite being composed by another artist, and features cool remixes of popular songs from the main game as well as some new compositions. I think my favorite song by far is the Hideout theme because of how homey it feels. It's the perfect song to hear after coming back from a long mission. The only gripe I have at this point is related to the audio mixing. Sometimes the voices can be a little too quiet during the dialogue sequences. Too often a character's voice is drowned out by the music. It's not a huge deal and it was something that I noticed often, but it's hardly a deal breaker. In the end, Persona 5 Tactica ended up surprising me in many ways. It had a story that might not have reached the heights of Persona 5, but in its own right was very solid and touched on some interesting concepts that I haven't seen before in mainline Persona games. Its gameplay was way more fun than it had any right being, and to top it off, it had great music and a memorable cast. If you couldn't tell by now, I absolutely loved Persona 5 Tactica. I think that if you are already a fan of Persona 5 and its characters, this game is more of that. However, the new additions to the group are definitely the standouts and they absolutely shine here. The combat system is a ton of fun, the music is great, and overall, this ended up being an experience that was so much better than I thought it would be going in. But that's going to do it for my review of Persona 5 Tactica. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to GameXplain and ring the bell for a lot more on Persona 5 Tactica and other things gaming too.